We are very excited to be joined today by Brett Boles. Brett is an award-winning musical theater composer, lyricist, book writer, and musical director. He has written 4 musicals to date, the last of which, Forever Man, was premiered at the New York Musical Theater Festival, where it received an award for outstanding orchestrations and the New World Stages Development Award. He's a proud member of the Tony-honored BMI Lehman Engel Musical Theater Workshop and the Dramatists Guild of America. Brett is also a bona fide social media star. He's the creator and host of the hit TikTok series, The MT, with over 385,000 followers and over 137,000 Instagram followers, of which I am one of each. Brett, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I always love doing these things.
It is such a pleasure. Look, I just gave a quick snapshot of your background, and you have an amazing musical story. Give us a bit more insight about yourself and your career evolution.
Yeah, sure. So my undergrad degree is in music composition from Ithaca College. So I studied there, and I just had it was very fortuitous that my composition professor was like a musical theater nut job. So we got along really well, and I wrote my not my first musical, but my first like real musical in college, and it was performed my senior year on main stage, which was awesome. And then right after that, um, I went into teaching, like vocal coaching, acting coaching, and then writing on the side. That's when I wrote Forever Man, that happened at the New York Musical Festival. I was back in 2012, actually, it was a while ago.
Yeah.
And then from there, I joined the BMI workshop. So I joined as a lyricist, and that opened a lot of doors for me. I met a lot of people there. And shortly thereafter, I became a public school teacher and did that for a little while. And then during the pandemic, I started this whole TikTok series, which also translated to Instagram, and thinking that, I needed an outlet. I felt like I needed an outlet for my creativity because theater was shut down everywhere, and nobody was really able to experience all of that. And so I figured I would put together all of my various skills and gifts, if you want to call them that, and put something together that people could feel like they could enjoy music and theater, even though really wasn't happening anywhere. And my best thoughts, my best dreams for that were that maybe a few hundred people interesting and follow me, and obviously that snowballed way beyond anything that I could possibly have imagined, which then allowed me to leave my public school job and start my own business, which is what I do now. So I started Transformational Songwriting last July. It's now the largest private online songwriting educational program in the United States, and it's awesome. Now I'm like living the dream. So.
It's amazing. So, talk a little bit about the transformation from, school, like music educator, and then there's this whole new world of TikTok and Instagram. How'd you learn to navigate it? What was, how did you have a plan? Did you kind of come by it ad hoc? How did it happen? Because obviously it worked.
Yeah, I knew nothing about it. My students used TikTok, and they said, "Mr. Bowles, maybe you should get on TikTok, and maybe that would be fun." I was like, I don't even know. I don't know the first thing about TikTok, but I figured, you know what, whatever. I kind of made a decision too. So it was a number of different things going on. So one, yes, I wanted to be able to educate people and entertain people, but also, as a musical theater writer and as a songwriter, it's important to have a social media presence. And I had always been notoriously terrible at that. I never knew what to put out there. And so this was a way that I could generate content that I knew I would never run out of ideas for. Because I could talk about anything. I could talk about all this stuff for hours on end. And my teaching, having been a teacher for so long, gave me, I think, the ability to kind of to know how to get to people quickly and how to get a lot of information into a short period of time to keep people engaged. And I was actually just talking to somebody the other day about this. When I first started the TikTok stuff, I had my camera set up above me facing this way, and about a week into that, and this was sort of by necessity because I was recording in school, like on my breaks, between periods or right after school. I kind of had I put the camera off to the side, and I think unlocked everything, because that then felt like I was just talking to a student sitting next to me and being able to fill them in on something that I found really exciting. And I think as people were watching that, it sort of felt like they were just with me, looking over my shoulder rather than me talking to them. And I think that's what started to really make the change in views going up. At least I credit that to that. I think that's what worked. But I mean, obviously the content is what the content is, so it helps. It's got to be relatively decent to begin with. But that then I just sort of learned as I went. Um, at first, I was really concerned with giving people what they wanted because you want to get you want to get view counts up and like counts up and all that stupid stuff. And it took me like a year to kind of get off the dopamine hit of like constantly going to see
How
how
many likes do I
many
got? How many likes do I
likes.
got?
Right. But after a while, I was just like, I'm just going to do what I want. And people will either tune in or they won't because, you reach a certain point and it's like anything above this is gravy. So it didn't really matter anymore at that point. And then the Instagram stuff was very slow in taking off until Instagram started pushing reels because I had started my Instagram before the whole reel thing really took off. And then once Lin-Manuel Miranda started following me and shared my stuff, that sort of snowballed that whole thing.
Yeah, talk about that. I mean, obviously that's it's like, oh yeah, when he followed, I mean, that is a huge deal. I mean, tell us about how that came about.
Yeah, I had done I mean, I had done a bunch of videos on his stuff before, but for whatever reason, I had done one on Encanto, and it was in October. I was teaching my freshman treble choir class, and all of a sudden I had my phone on the piano next to me and I see this notification from somebody who had messaged me going Lin-Manuel Miranda with like exclamation points and I was like what is going on? I said right, hold on 1 second, I gotta check this, hold on 1 second. And all the girls were like what's going on, what's going on? I look and she's like Lin-Manuel Miranda just shared your video on his story. And I was like you will never believe what just happened. And they all started screaming and I had teachers running into the room making sure everything was okay. I was like hey, we're fine, it's all good. I couldn't really teach the rest of the day though. I had one more period to teach, and I was like, I can't
I'm
even
out.
like wrap my mind around it. Yeah. So yeah, that was really cool. And then from him, that sort of brought in all the other, heavy hitter people following me, and then that just sort of it snowballed from there.
Don't be bashful. Who else? Who else? Who else are followers of the account?
Oh God. Who else follows me? Zoe Deschanel, Thomas Gibson, Wayne Brady, Derek Huff.
Wow.
Um, My God, this is a lot, but yeah, it's a lot.
That's great. It's amazing. Good for you. You deserve it. It's amazing. You talked about the content, right? There's obviously millions of things to draw from. How do you decide what musicals to do, what songs to do? What's your thought process there?
That's kind of changed. Originally, I had people would I had a spreadsheet where I keep track of what people would request, and then every day I would sort of look down that list and think what sort of inspires me today that I know I can just riff on in 5 minutes because I never had much time
Hmm.
to make the content. So it always was what's inspiring me in this moment, what's something that I know I can immediately find an angle on. Um, and once people started getting into the Disney stuff, that sort of became, I mean, and I still do the Disney stuff because, I mean,
People love it.
Alan
Yeah.
Make whatever. It's like, that's my bread and butter. But um, now, now I focus on just finding interesting things. So I'll sort of I'll look through music, I'll listen to music, and whatever sort of hits me in the moment, like, oh yeah, this will be kind of cool today. And now, because I get a lot of requests now for sponsored content from other, so like I just did stuff for the Music Man Foundation for Meredith Wilson, and then the Marvin Hamlish Foundation reached out to me, so I'm gonna be doing stuff for
Wow.
them. Roger and Hammerstein Foundation did something for them, so you know I've been doing that. So that's so like how do I pepper in my own stuff with this content from other people that and most of it is very well aligned with what I do anyway, so it's not a big deal. But I'm very big on just doing what I feel inspired by because it'll translate. If I'm inspired by it and I find it interesting and fascinating, then I know that I can get other people to find that interesting and fascinating too.
So, you mentioned the Disney content. Disney is able to establish very strong feelings and emotional connections, particularly through his music, right? Obviously, you've noticed that firsthand. Why? What is so special about Disney? Because it's not just one songwriter or set of songwriters, it's really across most of its history. Why does it have such emotional heft and impact upon its audience?
Well, I think that is largely due to the heavy musical theater influence.
Mm,
That's into because musical theater is all about storytelling, it's all about character, and it's all about prosodic writing and making sure that the music and the lyrics are telling the same story. And so the people that Disney has hired tend to be are not always, but tend to be people who do that very well. Um, and the Sherman Brothers obviously were the guys who
sure.
really started that. Um, and then obviously all the more when Howard Ashman was brought in to do Mermaid. And that's where I think that, I mean, the Sherman Brothers wrote songs and they were great songs. And even you could say I think a lot of them were sort of musical theater oriented songs, but really I think when Howard Ashman came in, that really changed the game because he was coming really from a musical theater background. The Sherman Brothers were songwriters, not necessarily musical theater songwriters. They were songwriters.
Hmm.
Howard Ashman was a musical theater songwriter, and so he was all about the "I Want" song, the character establishment song, and he was so particular about the importance of storytelling, and then with obviously the collaboration between he and Alan, because Alan is such a strong. He's just, I mean, he's as he's
Sure.
about as good as they come,
Yeah.
as far as musical storytelling goes. Uh, and honestly, though, I think, and I was just talking to a friend of mine about this the other day. Um, Howard is such a strong personality. The original person that Howard wanted to bring on to work with him on Mermaid for the Disney stuff was Marvin Hamlish,
Oh, interesting.
because they had just worked on Smile together, and Marvin was the biggest name you could find. But I think there was a power dynamic there that was not in favor of Howard. And I think by bringing Alan on, that sort of gave Howard the upper hand a little bit, because Howard really was the power in that relationship. And I don't think that was a bad thing. I think it was a good thing because Howard really steered the ship, and Alan's music supported it so well. And when you listen to the two of them working together, like on those work tapes, I mean, it's amazing to listen to that stuff, right? And that's where I think the magic really happened, was the marriage between his lyrics and Alan's music, and I think it just changed the game.
And so for sure. And Alan's still been active, but then you have Lopez, and you have some other, and Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yep.
Did they pick up? I mean, was it a natural evolution? Was it a nod? What do you think the evolution came from the Menken and Ashman collaboration?
Ooh, I lost you.
Up, I'm
You
here.
frozen.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Let it go.
Can you hear me now? I'm still here. Brett, can you hear me?
Oh, there you go.
I'm
There you
back.
are.
Sorry, my
Okay.
apologies. Yep. I knew
All good.
I knew I knew it was going to happen.
It's all good. So yeah, what the evolution of that with Bobby Lopez and Lin-Manuel Miranda and all that's what you're asking?
Yeah, was it natural? Was it deliberate based upon the success formula, if you will, of what they had?
Yeah, I think so. And we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So and Disney's very good about when something works, you capitalize on that and you do it again. But also, um, Alan was a member of the BMI Musical Theater Workshop. And he came through that whole musical theater storytelling scene. Howard was not, but they did present for Little Shop together in the BMI workshop. So that was developed there. And then Bobby Lopez also BMI Musical Theater Workshop. That's where they developed Avenue Q with Jeff Marks, and it's where he
Love
met
that.
his
So great.
wife.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so that was developed there. Lin-Manuel Miranda, not from the BMI workshop, but he had In the Heights, and he grew up in a musical theater loving household and studied all those golden age shows. And so they all know musical theater storytelling. They all grew up knowing musical theater storytelling. And that's what I think makes the Disney movie musical film magic work so well, is because you have these really trained, knowledgeable musical theater storytellers that are doing this, and when you combine that with their talent for actually writing good material, it's a winning combination.
And want to circle back to how you evaluate and analyze that. So just from personal history, I first knew about you. I've been a musician most of my life, right? It's certainly not nearly as accomplished or have a deep, clear understanding, but I understand music to a certain extent, and have done it for most of my life. I watched you analyze Go the Distance from Hercules, right? And I listened, and literally mouth agape, never thought about music that way. The way I think is the prosody discussed, but never thought about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and you make it so very accessible, right? How are you able to take complex musical issues and just compress it and make it so accessible for musician, non-musician, anyone can understand it?
That's a great question. So look, I mean, I as a songwriter, as a composition major, and going through the BMI workshop, like I studied this stuff very closely for a very, very long time. And as a writer, I'm always doing this. So I'm always having to the same process I go through analyzing someone else's stuff. I'm going through on my own stuff when I'm writing it and creating it. So it's become a very natural second nature process to me to look at music that way. That's just how I look at it, because I create it. So um, that's a very natural thing for me. In terms of making it accessible, that's harder, uh, because a lot of times there's a lot of music theory jargon that is behind a lot of this stuff. And so I found that the easiest way to make that accessible is through text painting, is to talk about
Mm,
text painting and how a passage of music can support a lyric, or vice versa, how lyrics can support a musical phrase. And most of the time, you don't really need that much musical knowledge or knowledge of musical terminology to understand that. Not to necessarily, you're not going to see it unless someone explains it to you first, necessarily. But I think once someone points out to you, hey, this lyric is talking about climbing something really high, and what's the music doing? It's moving in an upward trajectory. You can hear it going that way. That's easy for people to understand when you explain it to them. um, there are times where someone has asked me, or commented on a video and said, hey, can you talk about, like, I get a lot of about when I change modes. I change something from major to minor or something, and someone would be like, can you, like, walk us through how you do that, like that I can't, without going into the musical jargon and the terminology. It's like there's no way for me to make that accessible to someone who doesn't have any understanding of that. So sometimes I just have to say I can't explain that without you having some understanding of musical terminology. But the other stuff, the text painting, which is what I think most people find really cool because they never really thought of it that way, and that's something that we as songwriters obviously think about all the time because
yeah.
it's what we do. Um, but your average person is not going to think about it. And it's the same. I use the analogy all the time of, you know you live in houses your entire life, you drive by houses your entire life, you look at them, you can appreciate them. But if someone gave you a hammer and a saw and told you to go build one tomorrow,
Yeah.
you wouldn't know what to do. And it's the same thing. It's not the same thing, but it's very similar. And once someone sort of starts explaining to you the rudimentary building blocks of how things are put together, you go, oh yeah, I can see how that makes sense. Even though I can't do it myself, like, I can see how this would attach to this and how this would go here. And you have to, as songwriters, we have to make sure that our structure is sound before we start putting furniture in and hanging the pictures. So I focus more on the skeletal structure of things rather than the furniture and the pictures, because I think it's easier for people to understand.
And when you look at the impact that you've had on all your followers, what's the mix of musicians versus non-musicians versus people who kind of are picking up versus people who have no background at all? Is it a wide range?
Yeah, I don't, there's no way for me to know exactly. I mean, anecdotally,
Sure.
maybe, but I seem to have, what I notice is, I think the vast majority of people that follow me are general public who just find this stuff fascinating. But there is a subset of music educators who follow me, because I get a lot of messages from teachers who say, I'm using your stuff in the classroom and this is so great. And my elementary kids love it. My high school kids love it. My college students love it. So people are using it like all over this, which I think is the coolest thing ever, that it's, people are
100%.
using it from like little kids all the way to postgraduate, which I find that's just incredible to me. So music educators, and then there are a subset of songwriters that do follow me, and which is how I was able to sort of segue into teaching songwriting, because that's, a lot of those people follow me too.
Mm. And there's obviously very specific decisions that songwriters make. And it sounds like there's an art and a science to it, right? When you're looking at things with your songwriting, with the Disney songwriting, how much of it is innate, just coming from them, versus how much is those deliberate choices, the rising, the falling, or is it a mixture of both?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both.
Yeah.
The way I generally explain this to people who ask the question is, we spend a lot of years making very conscious, deliberate decisions while we're learning how to do the thing, and then at some point, a lot of it is intuitive. It just comes out of you that way because you're so used to making it that way. In a lot of the same way that, as a visual artist, a graphic artist, you have to learn how to draw the circles first and put everything together, and you have to make those conscious choices. And then at some point you do it enough times, you just draw and it comes out the way you want it to because you have all those years of training underneath you. That being said, and the songwriters will ask me this too. The songwriters that I teach will ask me this too, and I say, look, what I would suggest is go trust your instinct and trust your gut as a writer. Do your first draft and do that from a place of emotional connection and vulnerability and honesty, and don't think about the other stuff. Don't think about the logistics. Don't think about the mechanics. And then once you get that first draft out, then you go back and you look and you say, where can I tweak this to make sure my choices are really deliberate, and that the music is having the maximum effect that it can have. Writing is rewriting. So our first draft very rarely is going to be the thing that people are hearing on stage or in the theater. But there's something really important about trusting your artistic sensibilities and your emotional connection to whatever character or situation you're writing about, that you don't want the logistics and the mechanics to get in the way of the artistry, right? The science of it should support the art of it, but it should not get in the way. So
Hmm.
I do the same thing now as a writer. I will trust myself on a first draft and just go with it, and then I will look back and I will tweak and I will fine tune. I'll be, well, this melody should really be going up here because this lyric is talking about this, or maybe I'll change this lyric, and then if I change this lyric, the melody is going to have to do something a little bit different, or maybe this chord should now be a major 7 chord as opposed to a regular major chord because maybe there's a little bit of instability, a little bit of melancholy in here that I want to make sure is coming through, and so a major 7 chord might be a better fit for this moment now. So it's always going back and looking at it and refining and refining and refining.
Did you ever have a songwriter come up to you and be like, "Yep, I heard your analysis. I never thought about it that way."
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I have people, some of the, there are certain kinds of messages that are just my absolute favorite to get. And one of them comes from songwriters going, I have learned so much about songwriting. Like, you've helped me. I'm going through college and I'm writing songs, and I've grown so much just in watching your content. Like, love those.
Yeah.
I love the comments from the general public, from people saying, look, I have no sense of musicality or musical knowledge, and yet I feel like I listen to songs in a whole new way now. And that, to me, that's like, I couldn't ask for anything more than that. And then the people who message me and say, I watch your stuff with my kids, or I watch your stuff with my parents, and like, that to me, that is like, I get emotional just thinking about it. It's like, that's why I do what I do. It's like for me, there's no better reward than hearing that the stuff that I do is shaping people's lives, changing people's lives, and it's a beautiful thing.
No, it's the power of music, right? Music is just an exceptionally powerful medium. So, bring it back, to you, who are your influences, right? Who'd you grow up on? Who do you love? What's your baseline?
So growing up, and so not necessarily in the musical theater world, I grew up listening to, believe it or not, a lot of country music. I grew up on a horse farm. My mom was very into horses, and she was
Huh.
very much a country music person. And as I've thought about it throughout the years, and when I first started writing music, I was a kid. I was, probably 8 or 9 years old, starting to write stuff on the piano, and they were all country tunes because that's really what the most of what I was listening to. But country music is very story oriented and very character oriented, so it's not that much of a leap that I moved from country music to musical theater music because they're very similar in that way. Um, I think anyway, from a storytelling standpoint. Um, and I listened to a lot of Billy Joel and a lot of Sting growing up. Again, the storytelling and Sting's lyrics, the poetry of his lyrics and his harmonic language is just to die for. And when I started listening to musical theater, it was Les Mis was
Totally.
my first musical theater love. I fell in
100%.
love with that, and the epic stuff. I always loved the epic stuff. Frank Wildhorn, say what you want about him, but the man can write a tune. And so that that was a bit, he was a big influence on me musically. Steven Schwartz was a big influence on me musically, and obviously Menken. It was, it's I was the voice of my childhood growing up with all those Disney films. So it's inevitable that a lot of my musical influences would come would come from them. But then also, as I really started to get into musical theater, Sondheim became a hero of mine, and getting reading his books and just absorbing everything that man had to say and had to write. And I was fortunate enough to, because I was in the BMI workshop, he came and did a master class, and so I got to meet him and like listen to him. Like I was close enough to touch. I shook his hand actually. So like being in the room with him, listening to him talk about stuff, and just seeing him going beyond the writing, just seeing him as a human being. And here's like the guy who wrote the lyrics to West Side Story, like sitting right here in front of me, and it's just like one of those moments. And I wasn't presenting my work for him, but another student was presenting something, and he made some comment, and he was like, feel free to disagree with me, you can disagree.
Nope.
And then the kid was like, he's like, I'm not going to disagree with you, but thank you for offering. So yeah, Sondheim was a huge influence on me, not so much musically as lyrically, and in terms of his main principles: content dictates form, less is more, and God is in the details. Like those three things are as a writer, I live by those three things, and that's helped my writing immensely.
That's great. Uh, you know, back to Disney, because you mentioned Megan as a big influence, as well as a lot of the content you produce. It's easy to say what's your favorite Disney song, but I'm gonna do a variation on that. What's your favorite Disney musical moment?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, there are there are certain moments that hit me. One of them is so it is, I think it's my favorite Disney I Want song out there from Hunchback, but
Uh,
there is a particular moment in that song that always hits me, and it's coming out of the um coming out of the verse into that first chorus, when we leave behind those moving eighth notes, and we go into that rhapsodic, that always hits me as such a wonderfully written, so specific moment that matches so beautifully with the storytelling on film. And it's just, it always just gets me like all verklempt. I love it, I love it, I love it. And then also, to completely opposite side, I think, is Under the Sea.
uh,
That's one of my other absolute favorite Disney. And there are certain moments in Ashman's lyrics that I just think are, um God, they're just so inspired. The way he uses rhyme with all the with the place play the bass, the card play the harp, but the like
oh, so
all,
smart, so smart.
come on. Like there's no, it's perfect, it's perfect. There's nothing you would change
Yeah.
about any of that. It's just absolute perfection. And then also there are moments in the title song from Beauty and the Beast that I just adore. Those 5-syllable phrases, the whole song, 5-syllable phrases, that's hard to do. And they're just like moments where you just like, when you realize the perfection of the craft.
Mm.
And for me, that's everything, because the, and some people might argue you're taking all the joy out of it, but like for me, that's what gives me the joy, is like the utter perfection in that craft. And that's why we react emotionally to it, because the craft is so good that it makes you feel something when
Yeah.
it's that well crafted. It does.
And there's no harm in knowing why.
Right.
It's great. It's great to kind of live in the blissful, like, I just love it because I love it. But if I think there's a deeper understanding helps the connection.
I think so. And I
Yeah.
mean, I guess
Yeah.
that's probably true for most people who follow me, because
Yeah.
otherwise, why would they be following me? But
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Can I share mine? I gotta share mine because
Yes, please.
I love mine.
I must
So,
know.
so I'm a guitarist, right? That's kind of my main instrument. So I'm particularly tuned to Coco, and at the end of Coco, when Miguel starts playing "Remember Me" to his grandma, and he's playing it, and her hand twitches,
Mhm.
little finger twitches, and then the smile creeps up on her face. That to me is what music does. It triggers all the memories. It's evocative. It brings you to a better place. That to me is like the show. It's like that's what music is about.
That's so good.
Yeah.
And you know, in that same vein, that song is so well written for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is it can be performed in a lot of different ways and be equally as effective as an up-tempo number and as a ballad, which is not often that happens. And Bobby wrote a really, really good song there.
Just
Um,
just amazing. No, just amazing.
mhm.
Um, want to make sure that people know about you. What are you doing, right? I mean, you have your social media. You also have some songwriting stuff. Tell us about what's going on. Tell us about how people can find you. How can people work with you? Tell us what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I've got a bunch of musicals in development. So
Oh,
I have one that we did down in West Palm Beach, had its world premiere a couple of years ago. We're in rewrites for that now, doing another presentation of that at some point soon, possibly in the fall. Um, I have a couple other projects I'm doing that I can't talk about, musically speaking. But then obviously I teach the songwriting program, so that's the big thing that I'm doing now. And I can give a link to you if you want to put it in the show
please,
notes and go
100%.
there, do that. So if anybody's interested in studying with me, I run a year-long program. It's basically the equivalent of what an online graduate program in songwriting or a collegiate program in songwriting might look like, but for a fraction of what you would pay to learn it somewhere like that. Least I can do is make it accessible for folks, right? So I'm doing that, and oh God, what else am I doing?
You're playing a trip.
I'm planning a trip. That's right. That's right. We're planning a trip with Trova Trip. So that's fun. I can put a link to the survey in the notes too if people
Yep.
want to travel with a bunch of like-minded musical theater Disney people. It's gonna be fun. We can go anywhere in the world. So I'm really excited to see how that pans out. And I direct a show every summer, so I'm doing that in Connecticut. It's my 13th summer with them, so I can't leave. I'm there. And then yeah, that's the big stuff. There's little collaborations here and there, but for the most part, I'm doing the songwriting thing and working on my own stuff. And yeah, and if people want to follow me, I'm sure you'll put the handles below, and the Brett Bowles on Instagram and Brett Bowles on TikTok. So
I will put those in. I cannot recommend people following you enough and learning, and you're just a joy to speak with. The passion and love for music comes through, and I think that is it's addictive, and it's contagious. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Really appreciate you being a part of this podcast. I appreciate it. It's been so nice to meet you. Would love to have you on again. Thank you so much for your time.
likewise, anytime at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.